Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. How are you doing? I'm doing great, thank you very much, and all the better for spending quality time with you. I do hope you're well. Loads of love to each and every one of you. And don't forget to get that quintessential drink, whether you need something refreshing and fizzy and vibrant, or something more warm and cosy. Go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, he lay there on his hospital bed, covered with a thin, flimsy sheet. He was stick-thin, scrawly, scraggy, emaciated, his globular skull shrunken with a faint scattering of grey hair that fringed its outer edges like the tinsel surrounding the girth of a Christmas cake. His cheeks were hollow, drawn, his eye sockets sunken, his skin like a deep mustard shiny leather that you might have seen on car seats back in the early 70s when those horrendous round beaded seat covers were in the height of fashion. His skin clung tightly to his skeleton, announcing every single bone that lay beneath its skeletal, bony, wasted, fragile veneer. His body looked fossilized, as if he was slowly but surely turning to stone, like a marble statue, hard, cold, tough. His bedside table was a mass of bottles for his medications. Then there were bottles of Mountain Dew, a couple of bananas, a scant selection of protein milkshakes designed to feed up his malnourished body that was failing miserably. He had become like an old car with an engine that was beginning to seize up, fail. Before long it would only be good for the knacker's yard. There were 4 other dying patients who were in his hospital ward with him, requiring pain management, 24-hour care. I would find that these patients were there one day, and then they would be gone the next, rather like the wild flowers in the valley. It made me hauntingly aware of the fragility, shortness, fleetingness of life. I knew at some point on life's journey, many did end up in a hospital bed like this. It wasn't a pretty thought. I watched the nurses attending to the needs of these dying patients, buzzing around them attentively like worker bees, offering them pain medications and anything else they might need. Sometimes my father appeared very lucid. Other times he was making up nonsensical, outrageous conspiracy theories in his head. Sometimes I would get calls from him in the dead of night. "Help!" he would cry. "The hospital are holding me captive. They won't let me out. All the doctors and nurses are involved in this hideous hijack. They're deliberately locking us all away. We're all contained in here. Do something. Get here now." I was informed by the doctor that toxins from his liver were affecting him mentally, causing him to hallucinate, but there were times he was thankfully very lucid. Those were times I treasured greatly. We never spoke to my father about his impending death, although he had mentioned that his doctor had told him that his liver cancer was very aggressive, that he didn't have long left to live. Yet my father, who was the eternal optimist, rarely thought he could overcome, even cheat death. Although there were times, of course, when reality hit him very hard, like a cruel, cold ice brick to the face. And those were the times he realized he was indeed slipping away. He could even tell that his body was now a shadow of its former glory. My father was all that we had in the world. Well, that was me and my younger sister Heather, who were his only children. We were both now married with young children of our own at the time. I wondered what would become of us once my dad was deceased. Would we ever speak to each other again? Somehow I seriously doubted it. My sister Heather and I were like chalk and cheese, complete opposites in every single way. We had never got along throughout our childhoods. I'm not sure if we were secretly jealous of each other, competing against one another for our parents' approval or affection, for there could be some truth to that theory. I do know that she had gone through some of my boyfriends after my relationships had worn their course. I did resent her for that. It truly bugged me. It was like she was so determined to always be wearing my cast-offs. Why could she not find her own boyfriends? It felt as if she was invading my intimate space. Sometimes when I would see other families together, so happy, cosy, contented on the surface, I would wonder why me and my sister could not be on better terms together. We were sisters, for goodness sake. We were supposed to love each other. Isn't that what families did? I did envy families like the Waltons, or those great big Italian families displayed on television soaps, where everybody loves each other to death. I don't mean that quite literally, of course. I would wonder behind closed doors whether those families really were that rosy as they appeared. Or was it just some clever, malicious act to fool us all, to make us blindly aware of our own inadequacies? Did they really not have contentious issues like we did behind the scenes? I was certain they did. Nothing in life was so plain sailing, surely. I'll never forget the day of my father's death. There wasn't anything about the day that stood out particularly to me, that announced that this was indeed his last day on the earth. It was like any other day at the hospital for us. Me and my sister were sitting by his bed during visiting hours. My fading father was smiling brightly. He seemed more lucid than usual. He suddenly grabbed my hand, and then my sister's hand. It felt so cold, so thin, almost as if I was clasping the hand of a ghost. I was struck by how bony he had become. I wanted to retract my hand, but I didn't. My father looked at us both intently, with beady, earnest eyes that were longing for reassurance. "I want you both to promise me that once I have died, you won't lose touch with each other. I want you to both try and get along together. Do things together as a team. Promise me you will. It'll make me very happy on my dying bed." I wasn't expecting this. Me and my sister nodded effusively. "Of course, Dad," we said. "We promise. I mean, how can you deny your loved one, your dying father, his very last wishes?" "I saw your mother this morning. She's out there in the lobby, waiting for me. She looks so beautiful, so vibrant, so young." At this revelation from my father, a prickle of dread ran down my spine. Me and my sister exchanged fleeting glances, as if to say, what the heck does that mean? Is this another one of his balmy moments when he's seeing things that aren't really there? He was claiming to see my long-departed mother. Did this mean he was about to die, I wondered? I went to speak to the nurse briefly, to ask her what she thought about what I'd just learnt. "Yes, they do often see deceased loved ones before they die," she told me. "It happens all the time. I think it won't be long now." She was right. Me and my sister sat by his bed. He managed to eat half a fig, and then he drifted off into a sleep, but his breathing began to change, slowly and surely. Nothing prepared me for this. It really unnerved me. He began to rattle like a snake. No one ever prepares you for this change in breathing of a dying person. It really, truly alarmed me. Apparently he was exhibiting the death rattle, which the nurse informed us meant that his death was now imminent. Sure enough, moments later he had breathed his last. I remember studying his deceased form. He was still warm. I realised that his physical form had become now like a shell. His essence had gone. I felt as if I was staring at a plastic mannequin. It was a mixed bag of emotions for me. I was sad and grieved that my dad had gone, but after his long, drawn-out, suffocating illness, there was also a huge measure of relief for the both of us. The funeral was small, intimate, a lovely affair, and then life began to move on in its usual way, as it always does. It would seem all our promises to my father were like blots on the landscape that was soon fading. A year passed, then another, and another. I hadn't spoken to my sister Heather in 3 years. Then she phoned me out of the blue. "I was thinking about Dad. Remember we promised him we would make an effort to get along? We've reneged on that promise. I feel ashamed. We've let him down. We failed him miserably. He would have been so disappointed in us. At the very least, we should try to be friends. It's been 3 years. We haven't even spoken to each other since then. I was thinking that we should go camping over the weekend to the National Forest, just the two of us, without our respective families. It would be fun, a way of honouring our promise to Dad, reconnecting with each other. What do you think?" I knew my sister was right. We had promised my dad that we would try to be friends. It would be the least we could do to honour his memory. "Fine," I said. Let's do it for Dad. Besides, it would be good to see you again, sis. Despite our differences, I still love and care for you. I hope you're not just saying that, sis. Of course not, I said. I mean every word of it. And so it was we both decided to visit Yosemite National Park. I'd never been there before. I had heard it was a spectacular park to visit, especially in May and November, known for its magnificent waterfalls, towering granite monoliths, intoxicating hanging valleys, circa lakes, and ancient sequoia groves with fabulously old trees that were so magnificent to behold. Besides, it was more convenient for us, as we were both from California, so the location was absolutely perfect. The park was more than I could have ever anticipated it to be, way exceeding my highest expectations. It was absolutely breathtaking. Just imagine a backdrop of exquisite granite mountains in varying shades of grey, rising up into the sky like sculptural masterpieces, their Rubenesque voluptuous shapes like a vast ocean of undulating waves. Then there are the meandering, silvery expressions of water jutting through the rocks, pouring out vast quantities of gushing white spray, crashing, thundering, jetting forcefully from a very great height into the rock pools below. Bedazzling, beguiling, sublime, waterfalls that will leave you breathless. They sparkle under the light of the crisp morning sun, with ethereal rainbows or optical illusions in showy pastels hovering over their foamy white showers like celestial butterflies. Then there are the alpine trees, the varying shades of green, so vibrantly electric, so vivid against the grey monoliths. A contrast so provocative, so mesmerising, so alluring, so dreamy. Then there are the endless woodland wilderness trails, some rocky, precipitous, treacherous, others smooth, flat, yielding, for those athletic or adventurous, and those less inclined. Then there are exquisite valleys, and of course so much more to offer, or too beautiful, poetic, whimsical, to put into any words, as no human expressions can verify or behold the full measure of the majestic resplendence of this natural, wonderful, tranquil oasis. Me and my sister took our bicycles we'd brought along with us, which I highly recommend for anyone to do who visits the park. We cycled around the loop to familiarise ourselves with the park. We enjoyed the Mirror Lake hike, which was very short, scenic and enchanting. It was amazing how well me and my sister got on with each other when surrounded by the distracting, daunting wonders of the natural world that leave you so speechlessly aware of how inconspicuously small, fragile, tiny you really are in the scheme of things, like little birds flying amidst the rocks, delicate, vulnerable, and very small. "I'm so glad we decided to do this together," piped Heather enthusiastically. "I'm pleased you came. I really am. It's so wonderful here. Despite our differences, it's good to see you. It's been such a long time, and believe it or not, I've missed you in a way." "I'm so glad I came," I said, giving her a big warm hug. "Maybe Dad is looking down on us. He's smiling, I'm sure of it. I can see him giving us the thumbs up sign. He'll be so pleased we're together." Me and my sister quickly set up camp under the towering pine trees in a wooded area next to my parked camper van. I seem to remember the campground was called Upper Pines, but I can't be sure. It wasn't long before the night set in. The light of the full ivory moon, along with the bright twinkling stars, was obscured, suppressed, subdued somewhat by the towering trees that now covered our heads in a canopy, allowing only fleeting trickles of moonlight to dance through the trees. But we didn't mind that. It was so pretty. We cooked pork sausages and burgers on the grill, finally roasting marshmallows, telling each other ghost stories like you do when you're surrounded by the open flames of a crackling fire, like they did in the olden days when storytelling was an intrinsic part of social interaction, where tales from generations travelled down the family line, rather like telephone calls from one generation to another, which meant that shadows from the past or faded memories could reappear again in all their glory, like old friends. "Did I tell you my husband Bryce has seen a ghost?" my sister piped. "Really?" I said. "When did that happen?" Well, he said he remembers it very clearly, although at the time he didn't know it was a ghost. He was young, you see. I think he was staying with his grandparents in England, who lived in a rather stately, antiquated, ornate Victorian home. It was exceedingly old, a classical vintage style, one of those scary homes where the floorboards tend to creak and groan when you walk on the rickety wooden panels. He didn't like that house at all. He said he felt as if he was being watched by tenacious, unseen eyes, as if they were everywhere. When he went to bed at night, his grandmother would tuck him into bed with his favourite teddy bear. But in the morning, he'd wake up to find his teddy bear sitting on the mantel staring back at him. It would give him the chills, because nobody put it there. It would me too, I agreed. That would really freak me out. Anyway, every morning Bryce's grandmother would ask him, "Did you have a good night's sleep, Bryce? You do look tired this morning." He always looked exhausted staying at his grandparents' house. They didn't understand why. He yawned the whole time. He said, "No, Granny, I didn't sleep well. I so wish that man would stop making such a commotion, thumping across my floor with his heavy boots. He doesn't even try to be quiet, Granny. He keeps me awake all night. Please won't you tell him to stop making such a noise? Why does he have to attend to my fire at night when I'm trying to sleep? I told him my room was warm enough. He didn't need to keep the fire going for me. He said he needed to keep the fire going to keep the house as warm as toast, or the master wouldn't be best pleased with him." As you can imagine, Bryce's grandmother looked at him in horror, saying that there was no one attending to his fireplace. She told him, "I put a fire on in your room to keep it cosy for you, but I allow it to burn itself out at night." Bryce insisted for 2 nights in a row that the man would not stop poking away at the fire and keeping him awake all night, because he was a very light sleeper. He was sleeping in the guest room. His grandmother was amazed to find that the fire in his room had not burnt itself out by the time the morning came, because there would be a piece of wood still smouldering away in the hearth. All the other fireplaces in the entire household were stone cold. They had long since burnt themselves out by morning. Also, the firewood in the basket had been mysteriously all used up, but no one had added that firewood to the flames of the fire. It was exceedingly odd, as someone had put those logs onto the fire, but it wasn't anyone in the house. Bryce's grandmother was so curious, so she found some old Victorian photographs of the family that used to reside in the property all those years ago, that she found once lying in the attic. She showed Bryce those photographs. She asked him, "Do you recognise anyone in the pictures?" Bryce said that he didn't, but then he pointed to a man in the background of the photograph wearing black pants, a white cotton shirt, and a blue and white striped apron. He was putting a pitcher of water onto the table in the photograph while everybody was posing for the picture. Bryce said, "Oh, that's the man that keeps messing with the fire in my room." It turned out it was the household butler. It appears that he's haunting the house from beyond the grave. "Wow," I said, "that really is some story. Does Bryce remember the ghost that vividly?" He said that the ghost was as real as you or me. It actually spoke to him like you and I would. "Amazing," I said. He saw a full-body apparition. That night, as we retired to our sleeping bags in the tent, I kept being woken up in the middle of the night by my annoying sister, who I remembered was an insomniac. I'm not sure what time it was, but it was early, really early. It was still very dark outside. My sister began shaking me wide awake. "Hi, sis," she said. "I wonder if you fancy a hike. I know it's dark outside, but it'll get light very soon. Go on, it'll be fun. We've got our head torches so we'll be able to see clearly. We can take some bear spray with us for protection." She said this, jiggling the bottle of bear spray enthusiastically, as if the very notion of going out at the crack of dawn like this was impossible to resist for me, as if she somehow expected me to be champing at the bit, rearing to go, rather like a rambunctious, excitable terrier. I had completely forgotten how bugging my sister could be. Her bouts of insomnia had plagued my family growing up. "Are you kidding? I'm not getting up now. I'm absolutely exhausted. Just because you can't sleep doesn't mean I want to be up with the sparrows." I tried to get back to sleep, but my sister was making it exceedingly difficult for me. She was shuffling around in the darkness, making a monumental commotion, crinkling away at bags of chips, chewing chocolate chip cookies so loudly I could hear every mouthful, searching incessantly for something in her rucksack, with serious thumps as all kinds of odds and ends went clambering onto the floor. She was being as irritating as the butler had been for her husband Bryce. "Please be quiet, sis. I'm trying to get some sleep. I don't know how Bryce puts up with your insomnia. Honestly, it's driving me crazy. He's a hero, if you ask me. I've forgotten how bad it was." My sister did not answer me. She continued to shuffle through the bags, willfully ignoring my indignant protests. I sat up, looking directly at her in annoyance. I could see she was putting on her walking boots, tying up the laces. "You've got to be kidding," I thought. Now I was beginning to feel more than a little piqued. "What the heck are you doing? Why are you making such a raucous commotion? It's like you've got ants in your pants. Where are you going this early in the morning? It's dark outside. Are you insane? Have you lost leave of your senses? Are you stark raving mad? Well, if you're not coming with me, I'm going on my own. I can't stay in here all night. I'm bored out of my skull. I need some light exercise." "But you can't do that. What if you get lost?" "Sis, this is not your regular friendly little Californian neighbourhood with helpful neighbours ready to dig you out if you get yourself into a scrape. This is the wilderness we're talking about, for goodness sake, with mountain lions, bears, coyotes, rugged outcrops, dangerous, treacherous waterfalls. Do you have a death wish or something?" "You don't have a clue, sis, what it's like to live with insomnia. It's hard, very hard. It drives me insane sometimes. You can't expect me to just sit back here, twiddling my thumbs for hours on end." My sister zipped up her anorak, put on her head torch, gave me a feisty glare, stamped her foot like a petulant little brat, and stormed out of the tent, breathing fire like a dragon. I knew I couldn't leave her to her own devices, because she could lose her way, encounter a wild animal, get stranded somewhere. Previous day we'd seen a couple of black bears roaming around in the park. I would never forgive myself if something dreadful was to happen to my sister. Strange things happened here at national parks. People drowned, they got lost, even sometimes missing, never to be found again. I was the eldest in our family, what was left of it, that was. I felt a sense of responsibility towards my sister. All right, you win. I'm coming with you. Please, don't go without me." I quickly put on my walking shoes, along with my anorak and my headlamp. I packed a little backpack for us with some drinks, along with a few snacks for us to enjoy, and finally we left our camp. "Oh, sis, you're the best. It means so much to me that you're coming. I always annoy everyone with my insomnia. I really appreciate your stepping out of your comfort zone. I know I can be annoying. I couldn't leave you out there on your own, in the middle of a national park, could I? If anything were to happen to you, I'd blame myself. I'm so glad I don't live with you any more, Heather. I remember your insomnia. It drove me doodle-alley." Of course, let's not kid. I wasn't desperately happy to be up at this crazy, God-forsaken hour of the morning, when everything was blanketed by an ominous, thick, inky darkness. It was early spring. There was still a biting nip in the air. A residue from winter, I imagine. It cut through my windbreaker fiercely, so it felt a wee bit chilly. I shivered, clutching my windbreaker tightly around myself rather like a blanket, whilst keeping my hands firmly locked in my pockets to keep them warm. I had longing thoughts of being back in my cosy sleeping bag. We made our way through the enchanting wooded sanctuary, where all the tall trees seemed to morph into menacing shadows, while the moonlight that danced through the canopy was ethereal, ghost-like. It felt like everything in the forest was watching us. It was creepy. Before long we veered down a hiking trail, through the moist meadow, covered with fresh droplets of early morning dew. There was a cool wind blowing against our faces, which was rather invigorating. My tiredness was soon swept away, rather like the curtain of cobwebs on a neglected bureau. I was now stark wide awake, refreshed, beginning to enjoy the walk, although, dare I say, this was not something that I would ever care to admit to my sister. I sighed with relief as a glimmer of morning light dappled the escarpment in a delicate shimmering haze that offered us just enough light to switch off our headlamps. On the edge of the field there were a couple of sculptural granite rocks. We trekked towards them, lowering our derrieres to the ground, bolstering up our backs against the hardened surfaces like well-upholstered chairs. We sat down on the ground to drink our cans of Mountain Dew that we'd brought. The sweet tingling freshness titillated our taste buds, quenching our dry throats. Suddenly we heard these voices. It sounded like two people having a spirited argument together. Their voices were elevated, shrill, female, feisty, indignant. "Hear that? Someone else is up. I'm not the only crazy person to get up at this insane hour of the morning. It seems that there are others like me," she boasted proudly, as if to justify her unsocial behaviour. "I think they're having an argument. Shall we see what they're arguing about?" We sneaked discreetly, ever forwards, in the high brush of the meadow, keeping our heads right down, crouching our bodies low to the ground. I have to admit, we were feeling rather nosy, but we didn't want to be seen spying on these people. I was beginning to feel like a kid again, behaving mischievously, sneaking up to two people like this. My heart was fluttering excitedly in my chest, as silly as that sounds. We were glad to see that there was another grey granite rock where we could find cover, close to where those voices were talking. We darted towards them like two furtive criminals planning a home invasion, using the element of stealth to achieve our aim. Sure enough, there were two people arguing together, but we were able to see that they weren't people at all. My sister and I were standing yards away from two female Bigfoot. We could hardly believe it. We knew this at once because although built like giants, these creatures were so uncannily human. It appeared that they were having an altercation together. They spoke to each other, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, in a very strange language that incorporated lots of clicks. The Bigfoots were about 6 foot tall, possibly 500 pounds or even more, with lean athletic bodies that were covered in long flowing black hair, pyramid-shaped heads, and very expressive human faces. "Oh my goodness! It's two female Bigfoot," said my sister. "They're definitely fighting about something. This is incredible. Who would have ever thought it? This is the coolest thing that could ever happen to us." We were befuddled, dumbfounded, gobsmacked, to be privy to the spectacular scene, hardly daring to believe how fortunately privileged we were. I had to pinch myself several times to reassure myself that this was not a dream. The tallest of the female Bigfoots had her hands on her elbows. She was glaring at the other Bigfoot through her deep-set dark eyes, pointing her fingers at her accusingly. She then began tugging at the Bigfoot's hip, almost as if extracting something from her. But what? We couldn't imagine. Then we watched the smaller Bigfoot. Her expression became downcast, subdued, almost resigned to the inevitable, as if she had to give up what she clearly didn't want to give up. The larger Bigfoot was removing a tiny Bigfoot baby from the smaller Bigfoot that clearly was hers. The baby seemed happy to be reunited with its mother again. It climbed to the top of her shoulders with the agility of a baby monkey. It began to suck its fingers, watching his mother argue with the smaller Bigfoot with a curious interest, while trying to impersonate some of his mother's oscillating hand gestures, which was too cute to watch. The two females continued to argue for a while. Then the smaller Bigfoot began to cup both of her hands on her eyes, then on her head, and she did this a couple more times. I got the distinct impression it was her way of saying, "I'm truly sorry." It was like an apology, I think. The large Bigfoot then shut up, almost accepting the apology immediately. All of a sudden, both creatures became more aware of their environment. It was like their noses twitched, as if they could smell something on the wind. It must have been our scent. They looked at each other with alarmed looks, swivelling their pyramid-shaped heads in our direction. 3 pairs of deep-set eyes were focused in on us. We had been spotted. My heart began to sink. The 2 female Bigfoots took off running like greased lightning into the woods, moving their long, slender legs so gracefully in 5-foot strides. Then they were gone. At no point were we ever afraid, not even when the 2 female Bigfoots had actually spotted us. I think it was because their behaviour was so intrinsically human. It really was no different to stumbling across 2 ladies having an altercation on the street corner. I really sensed that the Bigfoots were emotionally intelligent, very discerning creatures, not the apex, brutal predators they are often accused of being. Suffice to say, I'm sure that much like humans, you get your aggressive ones. Luckily for us, most socially dysfunctional people who behave in aggressive ways might be locked up in a prison or being treated for psychiatric disorders in a mental health facility. I don't think they were best pleased to have been observed by us, the Bigfoots I mean. I think they are private, evasive creatures by nature who like to keep themselves to themselves. Yet at the very same time, I do think if they saw a human lying helpless in a pit, needing some help, they would almost certainly come to their rescue in a heartbeat. There was a kindness in these creatures that you could easily discern. They had their own unique personalities, rather like humans do. Yet I'm hard-pressed to call these creatures animals, because they rarely are not. They're like people covered in hair that speak a language but are reclusive by nature. In my opinion, they are gravely misunderstood, misrepresented, possibly because a few bad apples can contaminate the entire cartload. As you can imagine, it was a game changer seeing a Bigfoot, the highlight of our weekend in Yosemite. Of course, Heather is quick to point out that if it weren't for her insomnia, we would never have encountered those two Bigfoots in the first place. She always reminds me of that, if I dare ever complain about her sleeplessness again. Me and Heather make a point to see each other once a year, to honour our father's memory. We speak to each other regularly on the phone, but we're still not that close. I've learnt to accept that. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a lovely story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.